According to the WHO, the Omicron variant of the coronavirus is a variant of concern. So here in South Africa and in Southern Africa, should we be concerned? What do we do next? Do we mandate vaccines or not? I caught up with the editor-in-chief of Bekisisa Center for Health Journalism, Mia Malan. I'm Peter Ndoro, and this is For the Record. Mia Malan, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Omicron. So first detected in Botswana, South Africa, so it's now become a Southern African problem to the whole world. Is that a fair description, or we just don't know where it may have started?
No, I don't think it's fair because we have no evidence that it necessarily started here. And how soon or how quickly a country picks up a new variant depends entirely on the ability to sequence genomes. And both Botswana and South Africa's ability to do that is very advanced. So our government, for instance, have invested hugely in developing this field so that we are able to pick up these variants quickly. So no, there's absolutely no evidence that it necessarily originated here.
Countries are shutting their borders. Is that the best way to contain this variant?
Well, our scientists are certainly of the opinion that it's not, and that there isn't scientific justification for it. That once a variant has spread to other countries, and we've already seen it spread to many other countries in Europe, in the United States, Australia, once it's done that and community spread starts, then travel bans really aren't effective because the virus will spread far quicker within the country than the one or two cases that you will keep out of your country. There's far more scientific evidence to show that if you screen, if you require people to do tests, and most importantly, if you only allow vaccinated people to travel in planes, that prevents more infections from spreading than travel bans.
Let's bring it home now. We're seeing a rise in infections. Is it because of Omicron?
Well, we don't know, but we know that it's likely. So we're waiting for evidence. Well, actually, we do know, in Gauteng at least, because we know most of the genomes that they're sequencing here show that it's the Omicron variant. So in Gauteng, we definitely know that's the case. It may take longer to become dominant in other provinces. But what we do know is that there are many, many mutations on the Omicron variant, and many of those mutations are located on the spike protein, which is the part of the virus that if we get vaccinated, that we produce antibodies against. Now, we don't yet know we don't have clear evidence as to what are the characteristics of this Omicron variant, but there are likely scenarios. And one of the scenarios is that because there are mutations that we've seen on other variants that are associated with increased transmissibility, so it makes it easier to contract the virus. Scientists think that it's possible that this variant could be more transmissible than the Delta variant, and there are also some mutations that are associated with immune escape. In other words, making our natural infections, so the antibodies we get if we get COVID, and those that we produce as a result of vaccines, work a little bit less well. But it's very important to know that we don't have evidence yet, and if that is happening, it's not going to mean, it's highly unlikely it's going to mean that vaccines don't work. It just means that it will slightly reduce some of the protection, just like we've seen with other variants. You may recall there was the Beta variant in South Africa that had some immune escapability, and that didn't mean that vaccines didn't work. What it does mean is that vaccines react differently, their protection ability to different variants. So as you may recall with the Beta variant, when it comes to mild infections, AstraZeneca, for instance, didn't work so well, but Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson worked well. When you look at Pfizer and you look at data that came from Israel and from Canada, Pfizer didn't work as well against Delta as some of their other vaccines. So we would have to see how specifically the Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer vaccines react to this variant, and it will take us about 3 to 4 weeks to have good information on that.
All right, so for our viewers, if I'm vaccinated, should I be worried?
You should not be worried, and you should absolutely go and get vaccinated, because the most important protection that vaccines provide us with is protection against falling seriously ill. And when it comes to protection against falling seriously ill, it's not just antibodies that play a role. There's something in your immune system called T cells that play a very, very important role with protecting you against ending up in hospital or dying of a disease. And it's much harder for a variant to escape the ability of T cells to protect you than antibodies. The scientists are conducting tests to see if there's some effect on T cells, but they expect that the effect on that will be far less than it would be on antibodies.
What about if I'm not vaccinated? Should I be extra worried because of Omicron, or the level of worry is the same? It's more that if it's highly transmittable, there's a greater chance of infection, but is there a greater chance of being more ill, more sick if I'm not vaccinated?
So to answer that question, we need to look at the evidence that we have. And the evidence shows us that most vaccines are incredibly protective against helping you not to end up in hospital or to die of COVID. So if you're not vaccinated, evidence shows us your ability to fall seriously ill is far higher than someone who has not been vaccinated. So you should absolutely get vaccinated. Also, if we look at past variants and how they've changed the ability of vaccines to protect us, when we hear something that scientists say they escape immunity, what previous variants have done mainly when it came to escaping immunity is to reduce the ability of vaccines to protect you against getting infected, so against contracting the virus. But very few, those variants have almost had no effect on the ability of vaccines to protect you against falling seriously ill. And that is why scientists predict or say it's a likely scenario that it wouldn't be that different with the Omicron variant. We of course need to wait for results to see that. But that means that you should go and vaccinate it, because if you don't want to fall seriously ill from COVID, then the only thing that's going to protect you is to get vaccinated. The only other option you have is to lock yourself up, in isolation and not see anyone.
Mia, we are starting to see a lot more younger people getting infected. And is it because of Omicron, or what's going on?
So that's a complex question to answer, because it's not a straightforward one. When it comes to young people, we are anecdotally seeing more young cases at the moment. We don't know if it's Omicron, if young people are more vulnerable to the Omicron variant, or if it's because young people in the country are less vaccinated. Remember, we started with vaccinating older people first, so the proportions of older people who have gotten vaccinated are almost double than that of younger people, so they have less protection. We would have to wait on hospitalization data. We do have a little bit of hospitalization data from Tshwane district, and we are seeing hospitalizations increasing. There's actually an indication that it's increasing among young children, but if we look at who falls seriously ill and who ends up in an ICU in that district, yesterday the health department showed that it's still people of 60 plus, older people, who fall more seriously ill.
When we look at other countries, North America, Europe, where a good number of people have been vaccinated, we're trying to get to herd immunity. Is that the crucial difference between getting these new strains?
Well, we know that the fewer people who are vaccinated, the bigger the chance is for the virus to mutate and to get mutations that could potentially make it more transmissible or cause more severe disease or make vaccines or our natural immunity work less well. Now, the virus only changes when it mutates, and the fewer people who are vaccinated, the higher the chance for the virus to mutate. So yes, the fewer people who are vaccinated, the higher the chance are that we would get more variants. But important that other countries who have high vaccination rates didn't just achieve it by telling, by spontaneously people coming to get vaccinated. They reached a stage where, in the United States, for instance, where they had to start to implement vaccine mandates because they reached a stage where just not enough people were coming for vaccination any longer. And in South Africa, there are pretty strong indications now that we are likely to implement vaccine mandates. There's a committee that consists of labor and business and government, and they will probably give us recommendations by the weekend. And then we will likely see things like you can't use public transport unless you can prove that you were fully vaccinated, or you can't go to a restaurant unless you can prove it, and specifically not in indoor spaces. Of course, essential services are likely to stay open, so you can go to a hospital or go and buy food. But the thing is, yes, you have a human right to decide that you don't want to get vaccinated, but then the people who may get affected by your decision also have a right to get protected. And if you don't get vaccinated, vaccines don't just protect us against falling seriously ill, they also reduce our ability to get infected, although you can still get infected, but you're still less likely to get infected. So if you're not vaccinated, then you pose a higher risk for someone else to be infected because the chances of you being positive for COVID is higher. So it's a responsibility of the country then to make sure that people are protected against people who are not vaccinated. So in about, a week or two from now, I think we'll have a clearer idea of what exactly will happen.
For mandates to work, it's going to be crucially important, I guess, that you have, and I think we started this conversation before, secure certificates or whatever it is that proves that Mia has been vaccinated, that you can't go and buy it, that you can't go print it yourself. How far are we in terms of the technology to have secure certification?
So I think we're actually pretty far along the way. The vaccination certificates happened in 3 phases. The first phase was to just give you a certificate. There was a QR code on it, but it didn't work. So it wasn't that secure. The security really only relied on sending an SMS to your phone and then making sure it's you. Now they're at the stage where they've activated the QR code. So that's an extra level of security. And they haven't announced that it's available yet, but they did give an indication, the health department, that it should be available anytime now. The next level, which they think they may have ready before the end of the year, is to implement something called a cryptographic signature or a digital signature, which makes it much harder to falsify. And once that has been implemented, I think we would pretty much be at the highest security level that we can be at this stage. And it will make it hard to falsify it. Of course, with everything we see, there's also falsification always, but at least that will make it much harder to falsify.
How far away do you think we are from mandates? Because I guess the dilemma that the president has is, do I shut down the economy or do I lock down do I force people to get vaccinated or do I shut down the economy? That's really his choice, isn't it?
Yes, you have a choice. Either we know the virus spreads with movement. So you either need to make people not move. So it means you have lockdown level 4 or 5 and keep everyone indoors. Or you make sure that if you do move, because a lockdown will have such a huge implication on the economy, you keep it open and then you make sure that people are safe. And the only way that we know how to make people safe is vaccination. Of course, there's non-pharmaceutical measures to also protect yourself, but ultimately vaccines are our biggest way of protection. So when it comes to mandates for dates, well, we already have dates for some companies. Discovery has said they're starting in January with vaccine mandates. There are other companies, Sanlam, large companies that have said that now. What we may see now is that there may be rules that all companies have to, in the workplace, have vaccine mandates. The date for implementation has to be fair. I don't know what that date would be, but fair means you need to give people a reasonable time to get vaccinated. So you may have to give them a month or 2 and have a deadline that's a little bit later. For public transport and those other things that would pose huge risk of infection, I think by the weekend we will have a better idea once we have those recommendations from the NETLAC committee, and hopefully there will be dates in those as well.
All right, so I've been double jabbed and I'm over 50. If I was in the US, I'd be now thinking about a booster shot. Is that on the horizon for us?
So we've already started with booster shots for health workers, as you will know, in the Sisonke trial. About a quarter of the trial participants have already received a second J&J shot. Now, Pfizer has applied with our medicine regulator, SAPRA, for approval of use of a booster, so a third Pfizer shot. And the health department yesterday said they're hoping that there would be approval during the course of this week. We can't do boosters unless SAPRA has approved them. And once that has happened, we need the Ministerial Advisory Committee to recommend it to the Health Department. There's also an indication that that process is very advanced already. Yesterday, the Health Department said that if we start with boosters, which we're likely to do because there's so much evidence for it, then we will phase it in. So we will start with older people and perhaps people with weak immune systems. Although with weak immune systems, it's very, very hard to control that, because how do you prove all these comorbidities? We are starting tomorrow on the 1st of December with giving extra shots to people with very specific conditions that make their immune systems weak. But that is technically not a booster, it's just an extra shot. So it's for people for who 2 shots don't give sufficient immunity because they have such weak immune systems. For instance, people who have had organ transplants, or people with HIV who are not on treatment and have very, very weak immune systems. And you get that extra shot far sooner than a booster shot. You get it 28 days after your primary schedule has ended, where, for instance, with a Pfizer booster, the recommendation is generally about 6 months after your second shot.
And is the booster a different concoction, or is it just another shot of the shots that we've got already?
So it depends which vaccine you talk of, but with Pfizer and J&J in our country, those booster shots look exactly the same as the other shots that you received.
All right, so perhaps to end this conversation, final word to our viewers. Omicron is with us, and the best way to defend ourselves is?
To get vaccinated and to not panic. There is really no reason to panic. We've had other variants before. We've learned how to deal with these. We'll deal with it again.
Malan, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.